very, very excited to be here today to talk about the next generation of VMS technology. Also very, very excited to share some of Ardent Partners' premier research findings, as well as tackle some of the more evolutionary components of modern contingent workforce management. We talk a little bit about how the VMS platform fits in the past, present, and future. So a very, very brief overview of today's agenda before we really move on to the more exciting portions of today's webinar. We'll give you all a very, very quick background and introduction about who I am, who Ardent Partners is. Also introduce our sponsor and our guest speaker today, who's going to provide some first-hand knowledge about the VMS platform. We'll dive into something I call modern take on contingent workforce management. These are just some very recent research findings that really tackle sort of the general modern scope of contingent labor and contract talent, and how organizations are currently managing their contract talent, and what sort of pressures they're facing in regards to the industry. Then we'll take a look at what I like to call the next-gen vendor management system, and this is where the real meat of today's webinar is, and we'll take a look back about how VMS systems looked, only a decade ago, how they're currently structured today, and where they can go in the future, and what that really means for companies looking to drive more value out of their contingent workforce management programs. We'll tie things up with some recommendations and a wrap up. And before we take questions from all of you, we'll have Edward Jackson, President of Provade, on the line to share some of the first-hand knowledge about what the future of the VMS platform is and how that will tie into the contingent workforce management industry. A little housekeeping before we move on. To answer probably the most popular question of all, yes, all attendees of today's webcast will receive a copy of the presentation, so no worries there. Also, today's presentation will be recorded, so in the event you have to duck out early, or for those of you that aren't going to miss the webcast entirely, we will get in touch with you about how to access the recorded presentation. We do encourage your questions, so please submit them via the Q&A box on the right side of your screen. The Q&A is really a good opportunity for all of you in attendance today to interact with all of us that are speaking today. Any questions at all, even if you go with a very simple question that may require our knowledge to help, don't be afraid at all. Please feel free to ask your questions, and we'll tackle them at the end of the webcast. And of course, if you're having any logistical issues whatsoever, whether problems with audio, problems with the slides moving, or anything at all, please contact one of us via the chat box on the right side of your screen. We'd like to thank today's sponsor, Provade, an industry leader in the VMS space, for sponsoring today's webcast. Thanks again for providing all of us with a great platform here today to talk about greater contingent workforce management and, of course, the role of technology. So a very, very brief background and intro before we move on to the more exciting portions of today's webcast. So who is Ardent Partners? Ardent Partners is a research and advisory firm that's really focused on advancing some of the more evolutionary strategies under the greater supply management umbrella. When you hear the term supply management, we're not just focused on the procurement side of your business. All the Ardent analysts all really have expertise in a wide variety of areas. In addition to supply management procurement, we also have expertise across the payable spectrum, which of course includes cash management, financial management, accounts payable, and of course my specialty is what's called complex spend management. And the real goal of Ardent Partners is to really educate the global market on the various technologies, solutions, processes, sort of the next-gen strategies that help drive business value and accelerate organizational transformation within the modern enterprise. A little bit about me. My name is Dwyer, Research Director and VP of Ops at Ardent Partners. I have given many of these webinars in the past and have contributed to hundreds of research studies over my nearly 8-year career as an industry analyst. And When I say I'm a recognized expert in complex spend management, that is my real passion in life. I've made it sort of a quest for myself to really educate the global market on what it means to be managing what we call complex spending. And these are these gigantic spend buckets across every organization that may or may not have some very effective level of rigor behind them. So think of some of those indirect spend categories like business travel, meetings and events, marketing spending, and of course, contingent labor. And now, of course, when we talk about complex spending, we are not just referring to the financial or spend management aspects of these big gigantic categories of spending. They're called complex for a reason, and the reason why I've really made it my life's work to focus on these topics is because, again, it is not just a matter of implementing a very simple series of processes or just covering it with a layer of automation. These are very complex spend areas that require collaboration, technology, and next-gen solutions and strategies. Some of you may know me from my time at the Aberdeen Group. Left Aberdeen at the beginning of the year to join Ardent Partners, and of course, over my time as an industry analyst, that trumps thousands of organizations across spend and supply management. So, very excited to be here. I'd like to introduce very quickly here before we move on our other guest speaker for today, Edward E.J. Jackson, President of Provade. E.J., thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Chris. Look forward to a great presentation.
Thanks.
If you want to go ahead, my own background, for those of you in attendance, about 20 years of software, largely focused on ERP and software as a service with SaaS. I'm the president, co-founder of Provade. Also was the CTO and co-founder of a company called Skills Village, which was acquired by PeopleSoft in 2001. One of the early VMS companies in the States, started back in the 90s, and been engaged on particularly the VMS industry for almost 15 years now. And I hope you find today's discussion and presentation of you. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, TJ. So, throughout my course of being an analyst here in the contingent workforce management industry, I sort of gained some first-hand knowledge regarding how the space has evolved. And one of the interesting aspects that I can sort of put my name behind is something called the contingent workforce management framework. And this is a way, not only for me as an analyst to talk on a global scale of what the modern scope of contingent labor really looks like, but it's really a way for all of you in attendance today to paint some type of vivid picture of what contingent labor looks like, how it's composed, what are the attributes, and how it's really sliced up. And what you see here, there's four squares, but three actual buckets that go into the contingent workforce management framework. Traditional temp labor, independent contractors, and then professional services and SOW-based projects that are sort of bundled together. And you'll see here on my sort of definition slide, traditional temp labor really is a classic sense of contingent labor. When you think of temp labor, what's really the first thing that pops into your head? You think of, short-term needs, project-based needs. I'm going to turn to a staffing provider. That is the most classic sense of contract talent, of temp labor, and why I call it traditional temp labor. And really within the scope of the contingent workforce management framework, and none of these things are really easy to manage, but if there's one that you could really say, hey, I think we really know what we're doing here, it's typically on the side of traditional temp labor. I feel that at least half or more of companies out there have really mastered the art of managing traditional temp labor, just because they've been doing it for so long. If you're a business executive and you've been in your role for 15, 20, 25 years or more, you could probably look back to the 80s, 90s, and even the past 15 years or so and say, yeah, we've been using staffing suppliers for a long time and we really haven't had trouble managing those. So really the most classic sense of labor. Moving Moving on to something that's a lot more complex, the complex contingent labor category of the contingent workforce management framework is where I would say the vast majority of attention is nowadays. These are the components of contract talent that aren't so easy to manage, usually sit in the darkest, most hidden corners across your organization, and are typically leveraged by every big group and every big unit. You know, IT, sales, marketing, operations, so many finance, AP, so many different departments within the average organization are managing services, whether they're professional, non-professional, recurring, or non-recurring, in some way. Utilizing SOW-based labor, SOW-based projects that are tied to a formalized, standardized agreement of milestones, key delivery dates. This is called complex contingent labor simply because it's super duper complex. It really is the hardest category to manage within the CWO framework. And you may ask, well, why? And I mean, we've used professional services for years, non-professional services, whether they're recurring or not. And, there's plenty of contractors, consultants, and all types of services that are working at our organization and tied to an SOW. The real sort of tough hill to get over here within complex contingent labor is there's a few different things that I typically talk about here. One, visibility. It's really tough to gain visibility into all the enterprise-wide projects at your organization, and what type of contract talent is currently being utilized to support those projects. Not every exec at the average company has visibility into what the SOWs themselves or the services agreements look like. What are the milestones? What are the delivery dates? Do we have some type of process in place where we know maybe a week or two ahead, or even months at a time ahead of when we're going to miss a milestone, when we're going to miss a delivery date, and what are the ramifications within our organization? So, we'll go into this in a lot more detail throughout the course of the webinar, but really, it's called complex for a reason. And then the third, and definitely not the least important at all, independent contractors play a vital role in the CWO framework. And these are more of the individuals engaged directly by the enterprise. So think of someone in your personal network that comes on your organization on a contract basis. You pay them via 1099, and you're really only hiring them because of their skills or expertise. The problem with ICs, as they're called, are they sometimes fall outside of the CWM program, and that's what typically happens when executives and professionals across the organization are engaging individuals or services, without the aid of a VMS, without the aid of procurement, without the proper permissions or the proper standards and guidelines. That's the biggest problem with ICs, and there are many risks associated. Misclassification, co-employment, the list goes on. For those of you that are just sort of getting into the CWM game and may ask, what's so bad about ICs? There's nothing really bad about them. They're just, they bring a variety of risks, but sort of what balances that is that ICs are sometimes considered the highest level, top tier talent in the field. So there's an obvious benefit if they're managed the right way. So with some of that background and intro out of the way, I would love to move on to what we call a modern take on contingent workforce management. And these are some research findings that Ardent has collected over the past few months that paint a current picture of what contingent workforce management looks like today, what it may look like in the future, and what are some of the issues that the companies are facing in regards to managing this bucket of spending. First aspect, I'd like to sort of sometimes take a lighthearted approach towards these webcasts and even some of the research that I've written over the years. It's always really good to inject some humor into what we're doing, so it's not all so serious. One thing that I've personally learned, especially over the past decade or so, is just how perfectly aligned Dilbert is to the modern business world. And, especially in the contingent workforce management space, you see here the Eagle HR director, played by Catbird, showing you just how much of the perception of contract talent has changed. These aren't, faceless workers that we don't really care about anymore. These are workers within our organization that have much value and really bring a level of talent, a level of top-tier skills, and a level of expertise into our organizations, all within the end goal in mind of supporting our overall business objectives. And, of course, while the perception of contract talent has changed, some of the challenges have changed as well. One of the very interesting aspects, when we look at Ardent Partners research for the space and looking at what's going on, what challenges, pressures, issues are companies facing in regards to the category, it typically boils down to two major things. One, cost. Two, visibility. Now, you may be looking at that top bar there and saying to yourself, well, yeah, that's no surprise to us. I mean, it's with everything that we manage on a day-to-day basis, it really all comes down to one thing: money, cost, savings, cost reduction. That isn't a huge surprise to me, and to be honest, as an analyst, I like to be surprised, and I like to look at a set of research findings or dig into a research topic and be blown away by, wow, didn't think that was coming. But when getting sort of over that and saying to myself, well, you know what, it really is a cost game for most organizations. Think about how much contingent labor has grown over the years and evolved over the years. We at Ardent Partners have found that over the next 3 years, the average contingent workforce is expected to grow by nearly 30%. And while that's fantastic, and while that really speaks to the value of the contract talent that we're utilizing on a daily basis, it also paints a picture of sort of behind the scenes look. There are going to be increased costs. We are going to be spending more money on our talent, and of course, that's something we're going to be very, very focused on. The need for better visibility. And no easy way to say, hey, there's so much going on across the organization, and I pretty much guarantee that you don't have 100% view into that, especially considering the evolution of contract talent and contingent labor. Like I said, maybe 5-10 minutes ago, the modern CWM framework isn't just comprised of your very simple staffing suppliers and staffing agencies and vendors. You have complex contingent labor in the mix now, SOW-based projects and services. Some of those are professional, some of those are non-professional. Independent contractors. Independent contractors bring their own series of risks and compliance issues, and it's very, very difficult for the modern organization to maintain a very clear level of visibility into all of those aspects, and that's why you see those two challenges as coming out on top. Now, peeling it back just a little bit more, we see that the workforce is becoming more blended. I mean, this is a real simple phrase for saying, hey, when we look at our organization's workforce, it's a fantastic mix of traditional full-time talent and contract talent. And with that, of course, comes its own series of issues. And, this will be a prevalent theme throughout the course of not only today's webcast, but, pretty much everything we do in regards to contingent labor. At the end of the day, with contingent labor rising and rising and rising, we're going to see our workforce become more blended. We're going to be seeing our FTEs work alongside contractors, and our FTEs work alongside different types of services, to really meet, exceed, or achieve some of our core business objectives. And of course, compliance on the scale as well. So many different compliance aspects in terms of regulatory guidelines. We talked a little bit about misclassification for ICs. That's obviously on the challenge scale as well. I actually realized that this slide probably should have went right after the Dilbert cartoon, but again, it's a really good way to reiterate what we're talking about here. We asked the end user organizations who participated in our online survey just a few months ago, what's your perception of contingent labor? How do you feel about it on an emotional scale? What does it mean for you as majority of organizations consider a vital component to what they're doing. It's a vital component to their business, a vital component to their workforce. That's huge. I mean, I imagine if, we had showed this slide maybe 10 years ago, the numbers would be more skewed towards either or moderate value. I mean, this is an area within our organization that is growing in prominence, and alongside that, the business value of contingent labor has grown. And I think a better way to look at it is if you mix together the red and blue of this slide, and you get something like 86% of organizations consider contingent labor either a significant contributor to the business or a vital component to that business. That is tremendous. So, as an industry analyst, it's always very, very interesting for me to shake up the magic 8 ball or look into the crystal ball and try to figure out what's coming up the pipe. What does the future of the industry look like? And when Ardent Partners asked the global marketplace a few months ago where they saw the industry headed, it really could have gone any number of ways. And remember, maybe like 10 minutes ago, I said we're talking about the challenges that sometimes in the analyst world you get a set of findings back and you're blown away by what organizations have spoken about when they lent their voice to online surveys. This is one of those instances where I was blown away. The vast majority of organizations see their CWM programs revolve around the concept of total talent management. And total talent management is a growing and evolving concept that involves managing both traditional full-time talent and your contract, temporary, contingent talent under the same, standard program, the same umbrella of processes and strategies. And while at the surface this may seem like a very, very cool idea, it seems like, in a dream scenario where everything's mixed together under a single technology platform, everything's mixed together in terms of data, intelligence, information. It's not the easiest thing to do, and I think that's why nowadays you only see a minority of organizations that have successfully been able to implement what we call TTM, Total Talent Management Program within their organization. But in the years ahead, I certainly expect, and the Ardent Partners team certainly expects, that more and more organizations will realize the value of it, and by realizing the value, they'll take the time to build a program that works, to ensure that they know the processes that are required for a total talent management program. And to wrap up that discussion, the real core of total talent management is a perfect alignment of processes and respect between procurement and HR. And I think that's where the real, the real value is, having procurement and HR working together. The future, analytics, and some of you may say, Chris, that's really not the future. I mean, it's part of the present, isn't it? Yes, of course. Analytics, business intelligence is a big part of what we do nowadays. Big data is everywhere. It's in your finance world, it's in your HR world, it's in your sales and marketing world, it's in your executive boardroom, it's everywhere. Big data is prominent today, and it's not going away anytime soon. We, of course, at our partners, just found that analytics is going to become even more of a focus. I mean, I think for all those organizations that don't have BI capabilities, don't have reporting capabilities, they're going to realize more in the future that, this is something that they need to build into the program. And for those organizations that are really embracing the concept of analytics and business intelligence and big data, for those organizations, the value is going to become even more clear, and they're going to continue to rely on analytics to drive their business needs. And to wrap up the conversation of the future, I want to point to the bottom bar there, the industry becoming more talent-focused instead of commodity-focused. You may be wondering what that means. Well, years ago, contingent labor was mainly a more of a spend management, supply management, procurement type of game, and organizations were buying talent and buying, services, contractors, temporary employees with the same mindset they're buying commodities and different types of materials. And I guess the core is really nothing wrong with that, because as long as you're using a robust series of processes, as long as you're doing everything in purchasing talent with budgets in mind, finances in mind, that's great. But the big difference between buying a certain type of plastic that's going into your product and buying a service that's going to sit on a very critical enterprise project for 5.5 months, there's one difference there, that's talent. And what we're seeing is that the market and the industry, is becoming more talent focused instead of commodity focused. Talent comes before the commodity management, the category management, the spend management. And this is something that I think goes back to a phrase called the talent wars, where everyone across every organization, if you're in an executive role, what's one of your main objectives for next year? Find top talent, engage that talent, and retain that talent. And we're starting to see that shift within the contingent workforce industry. So, without further ado, I'd like to get on to probably the biggest portion of today's webcast, and that is the next generation vendor management system. And we'll see here not only some of our Ardent Partners research findings supporting the evolution of VMS, but we'll take a trip back in time, very, very brief trip back in time. We'll look at where VMS solutions were years ago, where they are today, and where they will go in the very short future. So the VMS of yesteryear, and again, some solutions may have followed this model, others may not have, but on a general scale, the vendor management systems of yesteryear really revolved around 3 aspects. Staffing automation, figuring out a way for us to take what we learned in the world of e-procurement and apply that same type of mindset to staffing suppliers, and building a system that was very, was designed for managing staffing suppliers and automating the contract staffing portion of the organization. And the VMS solutions did a fantastic job of that. I mean, as staffing suppliers and contingent labor began to rise years and years ago, not at the level that it is now, but in the 80s and 90s, VMS played a perfect role in presenting sort of that procurement approach to managing people. And the VMS of yesteryear, you saw the first seedlings of supplier management and spend management, where you had access to information regarding spending on certain staffing suppliers. You could take that information and slice and dice it and apply some type of spend management strategy to how you're managing your temp labor. You also saw supplier management, and supplier management isn't the same thing as spend management. Supplier management follows more rigorous processes around supplier information management, supplier lifecycle management, supplier risk management, supplier relationship management, and supplier performance management. All of those different aspects all working together really, comprise the VMS of yesteryear. And looking back, we see the VMS which has evolved so much since then, but at the time played a very vital role in how companies strategically manage their contract talent. Looking at the VMS of today, spend management is still really at the forefront. And again, nothing wrong with this. At the very beginning of the webcast, I talked a little bit about my history as an industry analyst, and I talked a little bit about how my life's focus is on complex spend management. And at the end of the day, contract talent, services, SOW, traditional temp labor, ITs, whatever type of contract talent you're utilizing, chances are that is a big bucket of spending. And that's obviously why we're here today, to talk about better ways that we can manage that spending and some of the processes behind that spending. Spend management is really still at the forefront at the vendor management system of today. And what we've seen is that sort of scope of spend management start to expand. And not just managing your very simple staffing suppliers, but seeing spend management go into managing SOWs, managing services. That's become very critical for the VMS today. Business intelligence, a very critical component of the modern VMS solution. And I really don't think any VMS solution nowadays, you know, can really, really help their users by not offering some level of analytics or some level of visibility. Remember, you know, what maybe 15, 20 minutes ago, we talked about the importance of visibility in modern contingent workforce management. And that is something that is very prevalent in the VMS of today. So many of the VMS solutions in the current marketplace offer more robust capabilities for driving visibility, for you know, business intelligence, analytics, reporting. I talked at length this summer at CPO Rising, which is Ardent's official media site, about a growing concept called agile analytics, and that really, you know, takes the page from agile sourcing and agile business intelligence, where analytics are multifaceted. They are able to be utilized by different functions at any time, at any user level, and there's multifunctional value there, where someone in IT can tap into the system and gain visibility into you know, what contract talent means for his or her department. You know, the CFO can tap in and look at a financial perspective. The CPO can look from a spend management perspective and be able to plan and budget. And even for, you know, those top tier executives today that years ago weren't really concerned with contract talent, can tap into you know, a BI system as part of the VMS and utilize that information as a means of planning, budgeting, and forecasting for the future. With contingent labor becoming such a big part of our organizations and evolving at a rapid clip, it becomes very important to have visibility and have the tools to drive that visibility. Some aspects of talent management, you know, there's again, you know, I mentioned that the phrase total talent management a little while ago. You know, there's this growing and evolving concept within the contingent workforce management industry that you know, talent is more important than cost. Talent is really the name of the game, and that's where you see a lot of VMS solutions sit nowadays, where talent management is a part of how companies source their talent and engage that talent and retain that talent and utilize that talent. So you know, they're taking a page from the human capital playbook and human capital technology and applying that to the VMS world. And that's where you see some VMSs of today integrate some of those lighter talent management capabilities. Like integration and collaboration. Again, on the same scale of talent management, you know, you're starting to see a little bit of a shift in that way. Having VMS being able to integrate with other enterprise systems, you know, whether it's ERP, whether it's RPO, whether it's, you know, an MSP solution, all of these different platforms that we're using today, all these different solutions and third-party services, it's becoming very important for VMS as it's such a centralized conduit to contingent workforce knowledge for VMS to be able to integrate into those other programs and platforms. And on a collaborative scale, you know, someone put a gun to my head and say, "Hey, quick, who's the number one user of VMS technology?" You know, usually I'm going to say procurement. VMS technology is not just for procurement. It can be utilized in HR. It can be utilized by finance. It can be utilized by IT, operations, marketing. It really is a fantastic platform for allowing units across the organization to collaborate together, you know, and how each unit utilizes contract talent, and what's the best way to utilize and keep and retain that talent. So before we actually dive into, you know, sort of the, you know, a teaser there, the next trend of VMS technology, I want to point to some Ardent Partners research that is looking at how VMS users are managing complex contingent labor. And you remember that I talked a little bit about how the complex contingent labor of the contingent workforce management framework is garnering the most attention, and rightfully so. So many different processes, so many different strategies, capabilities, competencies that go into managing complex contingent labor, complex contract talent, like measuring the performance of suppliers and services, monitoring expenses tied to those project budgets, invoicing and payment aspects, you know, strategic sourcing and RFX capabilities, supplier optimization, all the different SOW templates that an organization may have, having a centralized access to those. So, you know, later on down the line, we're not getting ourselves in a legal battle because, we have an outdated contract or an outdated agreement signed. We've found that VMS users are more apt and better enabled and better equipped with some of these key capabilities. Look at something like supplier identification, onboarding, and offboarding. And again, something I've been talking about at length at Ardent's media site, cporising.com. The importance of supplier onboarding and offboarding, and general offboarding and onboarding within contingent labor. So many different contractors, temp workers, services, consultancies coming on board. And if you're not onboarding them the right way, they're taking more time to get up to speed, actually driving value. And if you offboard them the wrong way or you offboard them improperly, well, there's a concept within the contingent workforce world called identity management, and it really revolves around access, access to enterprise systems, access to the buildings and different organizational properties. Imagine bringing a contractor or service on board, and they have access to your ERP system, and you never time that access for the duration of the contract, and then 6 months later, that contractor or service still has access to your ERP system. It's things like that that make it very important to focus on onboarding and offboarding, and that's where VMS plays a very vital role. I understand a lot of stuff on the slide, so I'm not going to go over every single line. But looking at something like supplier performance management, I talked a little bit about the VMS of yesteryear and how it's very, very important to, invoke some of those supplier lifecycle management capabilities into how companies are managing contingent workforce nowadays. VMS is an ideal platform for measuring the performance of suppliers. I mean, look at some spend management technology and more procurement-focused technology. Look how they measure the performance of suppliers, and that goes into how they plan and budget for the future. We know that supplier A didn't do a great job, supplier B did with their milestones, supplier C went X $1,000 over budget. Those supplier performance management capabilities that are so prevalent in the procurement and sourcing world are very critical nowadays in the contingent workforce world, and VMS is an ideal conduit to that. So, if you ask yourself, Chris, where does it talk about the next gen VMS solution? And it's within, my opinion as an industry analyst, that I really believe that the next gen VMS solution plays a vital role and has an important delicate balance between classic capabilities, contemporary capabilities, and next gen capabilities. And in the classic, we've talked about these pretty extensively: spend management, supplier management, being able to manage staff performance. Of course, analytics and BI, and the importance of intelligence, visibility. We go all the way back to towards the beginning of the webcast, and I talked a bit about the various challenges that are happening within the contingent workforce world, and visibility is one of the top two, and rightfully so. Contingent labor has evolved so much over the years that it's in the darkest hidden corners of your organization. It's very important to have access to that information and data, not just spend data, not just financial data, talent data, project data, IT data, tech data. I mean, all that stuff is very vital today in really understanding the ramifications and impact of contract talent. Integration, like I said, contingent labor, God, if I had a nickel for every time today, if I could say the word evolution, have a ton of money today. Really, it really is the evolution of contingent labor, and with an evolving space and industry like contingent labor with any average organization, it becomes very important to be able to manage processes around that in a more robust manner. And with contract talent touching so many different units, it becomes important to have the technology integrate with more classic aspects like ERP and financial, general ledger, spend management, platforms like that. And that's where the next gen VMS really shines, is being able to integrate into all the systems. And then the more contemporary aspects of the next gen VMS platform, human capital. I talked a bit about playing a more emotional role in how companies manage contract talent. And the fact that the contingent workforce world is becoming more talent focused instead of commodity focused. Having some of those human capital aspects, harkening back to what an MSP would offer or an RPO would offer, Having those capabilities as part of the VMS platform really goes a long way into bridging the gap between procurement and HR and having sort of the best of both worlds there. Being able to manage it from a workforce perspective and being able to manage it from a spend management perspective. And of course, complex and independent contractors. It's really not known in the industry that VMS platforms either partner with other providers that offer more robust payrolling and ICC, independent contractor compliance aspects. Some VMS platforms offer it under their general technology umbrella. But that's very important. ICs are playing a big role nowadays, and it becomes very, very important to understand what relationships within the enterprise and ICs actually look like, so you're not getting yourself in trouble with the government down the line, and you're not angering the misclassification guy. And of course, complex contingent labor. Talked about it at length. You saw all those different Ardent Partners research findings there. Complex contingent labor is really the center of the CWM framework. And the more that organizations see their contingent labor numbers rise and the contract talent numbers rise within their respective organizations, it becomes very critical to have capabilities for managing the supply management aspects, the supplier information, supplier lifecycle aspects, having a supplier optimization, project management capabilities, and the next-gen VMS has those contemporary aspects part of it. And then sort of the next generation of VMS technology, and I've outlined three aspects here. Start with collaboration. Collaboration is really something that I think is going to go a long way in the industry. With the users in our survey pointing to total talent management as the future of the industry, well, it becomes very important that not just finance and not just HR are actually using the VMS system, that everyone across the organization has access to the knowledge that's really hidden deep inside the modern technological platform. Talent. The talent works. I just said a few minutes ago, industry is becoming more talent focused rather than commodity focused, and the next year VMS is going to be able to support talent management capabilities. And I'm not just talking about grading how well the talent has been performing, but really going beyond that. Look at talent acquisition software. Look at RPO solutions. Look at workforce management systems. All of those different aspects are on more on the human capital side, but can definitely be applied to the workforce and contract talent world. And with the modern executive doing everything they can to make sure that whatever talent they bring in is top level, top tier, whether it's traditional talent or contract talent, those talent management capabilities are really going to need to shine through. And then the final aspect, mobility, and this is something that EJ is going to talk a little bit about in a few minutes. Think about just how easy it is for us to enter an expense report on our mobile phones, or tap into some of our core enterprise systems when we're on a plane, or when we're on the road, or even when we're at home watching the news at night. Mobile applications have really traversed beyond the personal scope of the average professional into their actual professional world. And we're seeing, I think it's been a slower ride for contingent labor because most users are a little bit apprehensive about executing some of those processes that they're used to doing on a laptop or their desktop over their mobile phones or mobile applications. But mobility is going to play a big role in how organizations manage contingent labor in the future. Being able to make very quick decisions, that you're not going to always be able to be, at your office or at your desk or at your laptop or your desktop. You need to make those decisions, and sometimes the knowledge, intelligence that is easily accessible via VMS platform. You're going to need mobile access. You're going to need to be able to tap into that at the most inopportune times. And mobile applications and mobility are a fantastic way of doing so. Sorry about that. The role of VMS technology. So As an industry analyst, it's always very interesting to point to how technology has played a big role in sort of on the performance side. And very quickly here, we see that our partner research has found that VMS fantastic driver of global programs. So it's 2.5 more times likely than non-users to be able to formalize global expansion plans. That's very critical if you're a global organization, but only certain regions have those core capabilities for managing the business. Foundation of complex CWM support. I mean, that's huge. Talked about it at length, and I don't really need to reiterate everything there. But VMS users are more likely to have supplier identification, onboarding, and offboarding, which of course we talked about is very important. And also 94% more likely to be able to leverage supplier optimization strategies towards complex contract talent. That's definitely huge. And then the next gen VMS, so focused on the talent management capabilities, we see that VMS users are almost 4 times more likely to be able to blend their capabilities with an RPO or MSP or total talent management. That's huge. Again, users across the globe indicated that total talent management is going to be a big part of the future. It's great to know that VMS is going to play a big role in that. And of course, talent pools. Talent pools are becoming a very hot term nowadays, hot phrase. VMS is obviously supporting that as well. Having the ability to formalize redeployment programs for personal already known talent, such as university alumni or retirees that want to come back on a contract basis. So of course, VMS plays a big role across all of these 3 major aspects. So I'd like to kick things over to EJ at Provade, who's going to give an overview of the Provade system and talk a little bit about some of the main items that will go into the next generation VMS platform and what that really means for the industry. EJ?
Thank you, Chris, and excellent presentation. I think very aligned with Chris's observation and projections. We have really 3 core areas that for today I want to talk about. Certainly we have all the capabilities, as Chris described, the traditional VMS, managing the record-to-check process, the staffing management, supplier management, spend management. But as those things have been largely addressed over the past number of years, for us going forward, where we're investing our R&D and are actively putting our effort, it's certainly the first area in mobility. We expect over 80% of the transaction, or like the activity by a user, will actually be done on a mobile device. We actually expect that transformation has been in process for some time, the past several years, but we think that this year in particular will be an inflection point where more users will do their activity on a mobile device than through a desktop. That means also you have to have consideration to delivering native apps, which we've already done. We've got native iOS, native Android apps. I think for those of you, if you do your evaluation, having native capability is pretty key, as well as supporting other or having device-aware browser capability. Are we on a tablet? Are we on a phone? And ensuring that those that might not be with the 2 dominant, certainly iPhone and Android, collectively own more than 80% of the smartphone market. But there are certainly another user base. BlackBerry is still very prevalent in the enterprise. So that's an area of high criticality for us, not only in terms of mobility and acknowledging that these are how users are going to be doing the transaction, but for us it's also the breadth of functionality, ensuring we can do the majority of what you can do through the desktop, ensuring that capability has been extended to a mobile device where some out in the marketplace only allow you to approve a timesheet or enter expense. We kind of acknowledge that mobility is going to be so much more significant. It's far beyond than just simple transactions, but it may be the entire life cycle of process that's done entirely on a mobile device. And then certainly, probably last in the area of mobility is because we're in the mobile paradigm, that opens up additional avenues of capabilities. Case in point, you're a worker, you've been on board, you need to go to your work location. You now have the ability to map to it right from the mobile application. That's just one example using location-based software and things that you wouldn't have if said earlier, the biggest user of VMS today is the procurement department, and as you said, but truly the users are largely outside of procurement. I think when you understand the breadth of users that are involved in this whole ecosystem, from the hiring manager to the procurement organization to the program office, particularly if a third-party MSP, managed service provider, is engaged, the supplier resources that actually do the fulfillment, to the worker providing the work, to finance that needs the access to spend management, or even the back office on the supplier part that needs access for invoice and billing and receivable information. So a pretty broad continuum of users that participate in this whole end-to-end life cycle. Enabling those users to also be highly collaborative with each other, and it is going to be pretty critical. That's been another area of focus for us. We think that this process end-to-end is quite, as Chris had talked earlier, not to mention there are just a variety of constituents that participate in that. And then finally, another area for us is business intelligence. I think first, at an elementary level, the big difference between reporting and business intelligence, many people confuse the term business intelligence as reporting. Business intelligence really is the delivery of analytics. It's the ability to provide insights to take action. Another concept, certainly in business intelligence, is the concept of embedded analytics. So from within a transaction, you have an analytic that provides this intelligence and then enables the user to take an action, not just simply a report. Also, as Chris had talked about, total talent management and the blending of the entire workforce. I think this is an area that for most enterprises, you need to have a single data warehouse where you can actually bring in your contingent labor metrics and data and commingle it with your permanent workforce and get a total workforce overview. So that's an area that also we've been fairly focused on. So with that, I'll pass back to Chris.
Great. Thanks, CJ. So before we wrap up today's webcast and take some questions from all of you in attendance today, I'd like to very quickly go over what I call recommendations for action. And don't be scared and think, you have to do these 4 things today. I just wanted everyone that attended today to walk away with, 3 or 4 things to keep in mind as they build out their contingent workforce management programs next year and, of course, into the future. Number 1, understand how the CWM framework affects your company. Where does our traditional temp labor sit? Do we have a handle on SOW and services? Do we have a formal program for managing independent contractors? I mean, those are the things to really look at, for the future of your program. Like I said at the beginning of the webcast, I mean, I personally feel that, 50 to 60% of organizations out there have really mastered the art of managing the very classic sense of temp labor with staffing suppliers and agencies and vendors and all of that. But it's really within the other 2 categories of the framework, particularly complex and IT, which our second bullet entails here, that really cause the most trouble and really cause the most concern. And very important to understand, what your current capabilities are for managing SOW-based projects and labor, how you're managing professional, non-professional services, consultancies, contractors, from a cost perspective, from a visibility perspective, from a performance management perspective, and then from a risk perspective as well. Very critical. If there is one thing you need to do next year, from my point of view, it really is pay more attention to those 2 latter categories of the CWM framework. Strike a balance, delicate balance at that, between supply management and human capital management. It's the contingent workforce world is going into a more talent management direction, and there's really nothing wrong with that. But that being said, both of our feet have to be planted in both procurement and HR, and it's very critical to have capabilities for both sides. When you look at how contract talent is really combined today, it's mainly suppliers, it's spend, it's analytics, BI. All of those different aspects are, more on the procurement side, but you're managing talent, you're managing the performance of talent, you're trying to find new ways to find and engage that talent. That's on the human capital side, and that's why I say strike that balance between the two. And then finally, leverage VMS as a central solution for all aspects of the modern CWM framework here. There's solutions that come and go across all business functions, and some of those make it for years and then fade away. But I really always felt that VMS really sits at the center of contingent workforce management, and will play a vital role going into the future. So, great. Webinar wrap-up Q&A. We have a few minutes left, maybe enough time to take 2 or 3 questions. And throughout the course of the questions and answer session, we will keep my contact info up for you. Feel free to email, connect on LinkedIn, or shoot me a note on Twitter. Twitter is a great way of interacting with not only myself, but the rest of the Ardent Partners team. We usually tweet 2 or 3 times a day, so encourage you to follow me there. First question that we have here, let me look. It's one for EJ. How important will VMS technology be as the contingent workforce industry continues to evolve?
My perspective is in line with what you were saying, Chris, in that, first of all, you said 86% of the companies that you surveyed deemed the contingent workforce as very important or significant. And also you mentioned that the workforce was growing at cumulative rate of 30% year over year. I would also put in with that something that may even accelerate that growth. That in most large enterprises, aligned with your discussion of total talent management, are even reviewing their engagement model, meaning the very decision-making process they use on whether they hire a permanent employee or outsource or engage a third-party worker in the various facets that they could. So I think my belief is VMS is already at a critical state, and its importance and relevance is only going to get more significant as time goes on, as this category becomes, this category actually may be significantly larger and maybe possibly at some point in time 2 to 3 times larger than the traditional permanent employee workforce. So VMS will be pretty critical, particularly also as using this third-party workforce will require also greater demands on technology to be able to optimize that workforce.
Great. Thanks for your insight, CJ. Another question, it looks like this one's for me. Can you describe the concept of total talent management? Great that that EJ just touched upon that. But really, I mean, at the core, if you want to boil it down to very simple terms, it really involves, utilizing a singular centralized set of processes and systems for managing both traditional and contract talent under the same banner. This is a concept. I mean, it's not brand new. It just didn't show up in the past few weeks. It's been around for a couple of years, but I really think you don't read more about it, you don't hear more about it, just because it's a very, very tough program to get off the ground. And it's not as simple as just walking across the building and talking to HR, or just pinpointing one solution that's going to manage everything. There's a lot of stuff to integrate. There's a lot of information and data intelligence to integrate together. There's certain processes that work very well for managing traditional talent that don't necessarily translate very well into the contract talent world. So many different aspects there that make it really, really tough to get a total talent management program off the ground. But don't let me dissuade you at all. That this is something that, and as EJ just said a couple minutes ago, that's going to be a big part of the future. And I think nearly 60% of organizations in the Ardent Partners research survey indicated that was going to be a big part of the future in just 2 or 3 years. You're going to see more and more organizations, take the time, allocate the resources, and truly understand what it means for them and what benefits it means for the entire organization to manage both sides of that house together under a total talent management program. We will take one more question and then we'll wrap. EJ, good question actually for both of us. Maybe we get the first pass. What can we be doing to drive more value out of the business intelligence capabilities of our VMS platform?
Yeah. Well, off the top of my head, again, like as I mentioned earlier, when you say business intelligence, it's not simply reporting, but it's actually insight to action. And one of the areas that we're certainly excited about is certainly the concept of embedded analytics, which is a form of business intelligence. So having the ability at the point of transaction to affect that decision making that happened at that transaction using embedded analytics via business intelligence. Additionally, on the theme that Chris just talked about, total talent management, remember that certainly VMS are good systems that gather a lot of intelligence and analytics on your contingent workforce, but being able to blend that with your permanent workforce and using VMS as a mechanism to get true total talent management business intelligence, if you will. Without that data of contingent labor, you don't have the capability. Most companies are very good at their the metrics and analytics on their permanent workforce, and not as good on their contingent labor, and even far worse on taking the two together and taking that holistic view. And then finally, certainly, just in running the business intelligence is a core component of scorecarding and driving and managing to KPIs. So taking certain parts of the business process and ensuring that you are utilizing business intelligence to effectively manage your business. Don't just report on it, but actually manage and track and scorecard what you're doing. So that's my thing, Chris.
Great. Yeah, thanks, EJ. I definitely reiterate some of the things that EJ just said. At least from a general industry perspective, I know that anytime that I talk to an end user, I'm talking to a CTO or a CFO or even a director of HR. The number one thing on their agenda is always driving intelligence, truly understanding the data they have now and being able to use that data to plan and forecast better for the future. I know the question is more centered around how can we make better use of our BI capabilities of our VMS platforms, but I'll speak from the analyst perspective and say that's one major area that if you're not utilizing it now, it's something to think about for the future, just because there's such a gold mine of data sitting within the four walls of the organization that's just waiting to be tapped into, and there's a lot of benefit of that. We'll take one more and then we'll wrap it up. This one is all EJ. Question is, our organization utilizes mostly light industrial contingent workers. Our current primary vendor is threatening to walk away in the event we try to implement the VMS. Do you have any recommendations on how to work around this?
I think I'd have some clarifying questions, but I'll just have to make some assumptions. One of the challenges, light industrial is a unique category, and many of the off-the-shelf VMS do not handle some of the aspects that light industrial requires. So I think what I probably want to understand further is why would the vendor walk off? Is that because the VMS that's being contemplated might actually have a deficiency in capability that's going to impact their business and the delivery in a negative way, where their level of service is going to deteriorate and their cost of delivery is going to increase. So that's my guess. So my recommendation is that there's a focus on ensuring that the VMS does have the capability. Light industrial, for example, is one of the categories that we've focused on and certainly discussed. Just to give you an example of a use case, mass fill is a typical requirement in doing light industrial. We have to mass fill an order. Many of the VMS don't have, off-the-shelf VMS don't have that specific capability. And it tends to be focused on, a named individual at a rate and so forth. So I think my long and short, sorry, I'm getting a little long-winded here, but the long and short is ensure that the VMS does actually have the capability specifically for light industrial. And, it's probably good to collaborate with the vendor, find out what are their reasons for not having the VMS. It's based on feature functionality and capability. And then maybe evaluating the market if the current VMS does not actually have those capabilities and actually impede their growth. That's my thought.
Great, thank you, Jay. With that, we will conclude today's webcast. Thank you so much for everyone for attending. Really, really exciting content here, insights from both myself and EJ. Would like to thank Provade for sponsoring today's webcast, and hope everyone has a great day.